Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career, which took her across the world. But still, something's missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process, and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
Today I'm here with Kenneth Wong from Evercare. Hi, Ken. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Ken, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm from Hong Kong. I went to the German-Swiss school, and I was in finance over in the US for most of my career. After graduating from Georgetown in the US, I spent about 8 years in New York, where I was working in finance and in investment banking, and also at a hedge fund. And I moved back to Hong Kong. It was really due to a personal reason. At the time, my grandmother and my family, they were struggling to deal with my grandfather. And so I decided to move back to Hong Kong to be closer to my family about 3 years ago. And when I moved back, within a few weeks, my other grandmother had a nasty fall, leaving her completely bedridden. That's when this whole idea of Evercare, which is the company that I'm working on, started. And we're trying to find some caregivers for her at home. She wanted to recover in the comfort of her home and not in a hospital setting or in a clinic. And so we're scrambling to find help for her at home.
Did you struggle to find help for her, and that's what gave you the idea?
Yeah, it was really tough because there's not a lot of transparency in the system. For example, if I'm looking for a nurse or physiotherapist to help with my parents, it's really tough to find people who you trust, strangers, letting them into your home. There's not a lot of transparency at all. You don't know who the person is. You don't know their background. I just found it pretty hard as I was going through the process.
This sparked the idea of creating Evercare. And can you tell me, what is Evercare?
Sure. Evercare, so we're a home care company, which means that we try to help people age in their own homes, which is normally where they prefer to age, and with comfort and with dignity. What Evercare does is we provide both the quality care directly to their home, and we also have a platform so that all the family members can keep track of what's going on at the home while they're busy at work or traveling.
By a platform, do you mean an app?
Yes, it's an app. It's a platform where you can access it wherever you are, and it keeps track of all basically the health progress of your loved one. And it will notify you if there are any irregularities. It will inform you if there are any changes in their medication, for example.
What a great idea.
Yeah, that's really the concept of it's really marrying technology with the people, having a quality home care staff to take care of it.
What's so brilliant, Hong Kong is such a transient place and people are so busy and coming and going. So it would really be such a valuable tool to have here, particularly in Hong Kong, because many people travel for their work, so they can really keep in touch with what's going on with their family members.
I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's really catered towards people who have busy lives. They're trying to do well at work and also balance their responsibilities, if you will, as a child and take care of their parents and their grandparents.
That brings up another point, that the working hours in Hong Kong are so long and everyone works very, very hard. So that's another reason why they would like to keep in touch with what's going on.
Right. And we're often called the sandwich generation. So we have to take care of our kids and also our parents. And I think what you're seeing, and this is a global phenomenon, is we're an aging population. Due to advances in technology and medication, people are living longer. Actually, in Hong Kong, I don't know if you saw this, but we overtook Japan as the country or city with the highest life expectancy.
I didn't know that, but I knew we were right up there. And what do you think that is down to? Why is Hong Kong? Because we've got terrible pollution. So it's not that. Do you think it is the diet? And do you think it perhaps is the family values where everyone looks after everybody a little bit more than perhaps in Western culture?
I was quite surprised when I read that because I think here all you hear about is the bad pollution, the unhealthy work-life balance.
Conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we're just taking care of ourselves more. I think the healthcare system as well in Hong Kong I think that we take pretty good care of our aging population. And so I think both of those factors have contributed.
How do you think people are dealing with aging in Hong Kong? And now seeing your mission is to change the way that the community ages. What are you trying to do to change the way that they age apart from using the app?
I think if you boil down to the core mission, it's really just to provide them with an alternative way of aging. If you take a step back and look at how people age right now, there's really just a handful of options. If you can afford it, you might be able to hire some help at home, whether it's a nurse, a full-time nurse even, or a domestic helper to take care of basic chores. But if you're less well off, you don't have so many options. And so what a lot of people do, they end up just recovering in public hospitals or the like. And it's not a very comfortable way for people to age.
They're quite overcrowded, aren't they?
Extremely,
public hospitals. Yeah. That's the one thing I noticed. I think on the one hand, we've got excellent doctors who are really, really skilled and great teaching hospitals and all of that. But then on the other hand, they're overburdened, aren't they?
Yeah. And I actually saw this firsthand just over Christmas. My grandmother was admitted to Queen Mary Hospital just around the corner. You talk about the demand-supply imbalance, completely crammed. There weren't enough hospital beds. And from a family's perspective, you just don't feel that you don't have a peace of mind that your grandmother or your loved one is recovering in that scenario. So back to how people age right now, there are not too many options. And all of the options are either lacking what I think is quality care. If you think about finding help right now, there's no standard for home care. So for example, if I were to hire a nurse, most likely that nurse has a certification from his or her nursing school. But that might not mean that she is able to take care of somebody in the home. In the home is a completely different setting, requires different types of communication. So there's no standard right now in place. And we're trying to be the first in Hong Kong to offer that. And second of all is the technology part, because in this day and age, it's quite surprising in the industry of healthcare, we're still quite behind. Everything is done very traditionally, not a lot of innovation.
By that, do you mean just sort of Chinese medicine and going to the hospital and that sort of thing and not thinking outside the box like you guys are doing?
Or just even tracking how grandmother is doing right now, a lot of times is just through pen and paper. And there's no way for me, for example, if you were to ask me right now what medication my grandmother is on, I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I would need to try and call my parents to see if they have it somewhere written down.
Right, but if my grandma was with you, I could just go on my phone and check my app and I'd be able to see all that information.
Exactly. And I think that's extremely crucial when it comes, especially in times of emergency, when doctors, they need to figure out, okay, what exactly is the situation of your loved one? And when the family members have no clue or they don't have it recorded, then that's where having a centralized database is especially important.
Oh my gosh, you might be able to sell this to hospitals. They might actually start using it because it's a great idea.
Yeah.
It really is. Do you think that the age population in Hong Kong is marginalized somewhat or a little bit invisible?
I think if you just look around, I'm always quite surprised how much emphasis we put on kids. especially when you compare that to the many years of experience and wisdom that the elderly have. But for some reason, our society, not just in Hong Kong, but I think globally, we tend to view the young as they're cute, they're adorable and fun to spend time with, versus with the old, we kind of just put them aside. And I think that has to change. And I think the more that we experience it firsthand, the more we'll feel it. I mean, just for an example, my wife and I, over the weekend, we ended up taking this 3-hour course. It was a way for you to experience how the elderly live on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, what did it involve? That sounds interesting.
It involved you being hunched back, which was extremely uncomfortable.
So were you put in a brace?
Yeah, brace and weights.
Okay.
So that you can really feel it on your lower back. You can't really see well.
You've got goggles put on?
You got goggles, and then you can't really hear that well. So you've got noise, just like a lot of noise that it's really distracting. And so when you see someone after you experience that, you understand why they're taking their time, why they respond and react the way that they do.
Wow, that would be such a good thing to do in schools with kids, wouldn't it be? To give them an idea of what their grandparents or the older generations are having to deal with.
Absolutely.
What was your takeaway from that experience, given that you're in this aged care role?
I think the biggest thing is just empathy. I think just from a starting point, it allows you to relate more to this segment of the population. And I think just that in and of itself is a great starting point for all of us to experience. And number two is I think it also allows us to think about ways that we can help them as well. If you think about this sector, healthcare, health tech, traditionally, it's been people in the industry who have come up with some sort of solution. It's interesting that for our company, we actually don't have a lot of healthcare background. Sure, we employ nurses and healthcare professionals, but the founders, we don't have any medicine background.
You come from finance,
Yeah. And so we're really trying to take what we've seen in different industries and different geographies and apply it in the healthcare setting.
That's really cool. And it really just I hope it makes people think out there that starting something new or getting involved in a cause that really helps others, it doesn't have to be where you come from. It can be where you end up, but
Absolutely.
You can start somewhere and end up somewhere else if you've got a real passion for it and a belief in it.
Yes, absolutely.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you see the Chinese treating the elderly in Hong Kong in this culture?
Having lived in the US and having spent time in Europe and in South America, I think the difference in Hong Kong is that there's a bit of a stigma attached to sending your loved ones to an institution.
Do you mean like an aged care home?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not really acceptable, is it? Because the younger generation's just are supposed to look after the older generation.
I think that it's still very much rooted in our beliefs and in our culture. And still, for example, for my family, the grandparents that are still alive, they live with one of my parents' siblings. And it's never been a question of whether we would send them to an old folks home or an institution. It's just a question of, okay, how can we take care of her better in our home? I think that's really the biggest difference. But I think that with that, we're also an extremely hardworking culture. And so I think the bigger challenge is loneliness because so they're living with us at home, but all of the kids and grandkids are working. And so the grandparent is at home by himself or herself and is extremely lonely. And I think this is the one leading cause of suffering for most of the elderly. They're just extremely bored. And did you know they spend about 5 hours watching TV every day?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it's really sad to watch them just stay at home without that drive, without that purpose, without any social connections.
Are there even aged care homes in Hong Kong? I'm not even aware they exist.
There are.
There are, but they wouldn't be as common as in Western culture, would they?
Yeah, I think, and it's just because of also the proximity. Hong Kong is such a dense city that it's quite easy for you to care for your loved ones.
How do you think Hong Kong as a city cares for the loved ones?
I think we're actually, from the government's perspective, I think they're doing quite a bit. Our new chief executive, Carrie Lam, in her maiden policy speech, they've earmarked about $1 billion to subsidize elderly care services. I think on their part, they're trying through a bunch of different initiatives. But at the end of the day, this trend, this aging wave is so great that the government will not be able to take this burden on their own. And so it's up to families, it's up to private companies to come up with solutions as well.
That's what you're providing with Evercare, isn't it? You're providing one of these solutions. So I imagine that not only do you provide healthcare and nurses and also companionship, yes?
Yes, that's correct. Because going back to the question of loneliness, you really understand why they feel that way because it's the confluence of a number of factors. The first thing is that their social circle just starts to dwindle.
Because people pass away, don't they? Their friends go. My nan's 100.
Really?
Yeah, my nan is 100 and she's just moved out of her house into an aged care home in the country town that I come from. And my mum and dad visit every day because they're next door.
Oh,
but she was independent, living in her home till she was 100 on her own.
Wow.
With a panic button attached to her chest that would call my dad if anything happened. Isn't that amazing?
That is really amazing.
I know. Yeah. Anyway, sorry I interrupted. Go on, you're talking about the loneliness and people passing away and you're providing companionship for them because everybody else is at work or at school.
Yeah, so not only is their social circle declining or dwindling, but at the same time, they might have issues with their mobility. So it's harder for them to get in and out of their home. And on top of that, they might feel a little bit embarrassed sometimes because of incontinence issues, or they can't hear well, they can't see well. So they don't really want to be in a social setting. Just an example, in Hong Kong, a lot of people like to play mahjong.
I love to play mahjong too.
You like to play as well? No way.
Yeah. I went to the, here we go again. This isn't about me, but I went to the staff Chinese New Year dinner and played with all the cleaners and the stuff, and I won 5 games.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that impressive?
I like the logo then.
It was great fun. I loved it.
But as you know, you need 4 players to play.
You do. Absolutely.
The problem, and I've seen this so many times, is they will have their groups, and it's not just one group of 4, but they'll probably have 3 groups of 4, and they'll have lunch afterwards. And so it's very lively, a lot of conversations. But as people start to pass away, you lose those groups of 4. And when there's only 3 of you, it's impossible to play mahjong. And so that event is just gone.
And that's a huge social thing in Hong Kong. And people, and I have as well, played for hours on end.
Right.
When you don't have that ability to do that anymore, or you can't see what's going on with the mahjong tiles, or actually, having said that, though, a lot of Chinese people can do it by feeling them, can't they?
Exactly. That's for you to work on.
Yeah. That's one way to age with dignity.
Yeah.
Sort out your mahjong when you can't see and continue to play. That makes real sense. That sort of social life has really disappeared, and then that would heighten the loneliness, wouldn't it?
Right. And there's a study that just came out from the US. I think they looked at a sample set of over 4 million people. So it's quite representative. But they said that loneliness was a bigger issue than things like obesity or other illnesses. And they said that people who were lonely had a 50% greater chance of dying earlier. And
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so it has direct impact on their quality of life. And it's something that I think all family members really need to work on.
How can we embrace old age with joy and positivity, do you think?
I think one of the first things to do is for us to teach the younger generation, how to respect the elderly, and not just in a way that is taught in our culture in the family, but really understand and empathize with them. They've gone through so many years of life experience. And so I think the first thing is just to recognize that. And I always encourage my friends and even family members to attend some sort of class or course that allows you to empathize for the elderly.
The course you just did.
Exactly. I think it's just a great starting point for people to understand where they're coming from. And I think also another way is just to allow them the independence to age at home in the setting that they're most comfortable in. I think it's really sad when you see people, especially as they get to the last stage of their life, when they're still in a hospital setting, you can see that they're not comfortable, that they're not enjoying the environment. They want to be home. They're in a lot of pain. They're afraid of the situation. And yet in the last hours, you're not giving them the dignity that they deserve.
And also, it's got to have an impact on their mental health, doesn't it? Which in turn then has an impact on their physical well-being. So I think that comes back to what you were saying before, that those people that are at home and surrounded by people and aren't so lonely, they do better and perhaps live longer.
Absolutely. One of the manifestations of mental health issues is Alzheimer's or dementia, which is so prevalent in our society. If you look at the numbers, about a third of people 85 and over will suffer from Alzheimer's. And if you look at our customers, just about 70 or 80% of them have some form, whether early stage or late stage Alzheimer's. This is a really big issue for family members to tackle. That the earlier you tackle this issue, the better, because it's really quite a nasty illness for family members to deal with. But if you're able to identify it early, it can be a 20-year, just a very gradual decline in their health and much more manageable if you're able to tackle it early.
So there's strategies that you can put in place to help ease the decline.
Absolutely, which includes a lot of what you had mentioned just now, like stimulating their minds. If it's not mahjong, another great way is really through music.
Yes, music is really, really healing, isn't it?
Music therapy.
Yes, and even art therapy as well.
Even art therapy, yeah. Because those are the things that will trigger this emotional connection in their minds.
Well, that comes back to the importance of creativity. It's important for everybody to have some level of creativity in their life, I believe.
Yes.
I think it is. I think it's really very, very good for the soul.
Absolutely, yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the Evercare home care system. Exactly what is it? You've given me a bit of a few snippets here and there. Nurses come in, we have a bit of companionship. What else do you offer with the home care?
Our biggest value proposition is that we offer a care management model. The care management model isn't anything new. Actually, when we first started this concept, we looked at the best models in the US, in Australia, in Europe. And we found that there was a system that actually worked really well. It's been around since the 60s or 70s. The care management model really focuses on providing holistic care. So it's not just about sending a nurse to their home or a physiotherapist, but it's about having somebody manage the progress of their health. And that might include a team of nurses, physiotherapists, and other healthcare professionals. The main thing is that we're trying to monitor their health. We come up with a care plan and a care assessment so that family members know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with our care. Then we select the relevant team based on the preferences of the families. For example, what language the loved one is most comfortable in, what are the main criteria that the families really care about. All these things, we build a team around them. And then on a regular basis, our care manager will track and check how the loved one is doing at home. And then we'll update the family members.
Essentially, you tailor-make the program for each individual.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's so cool. That's really great. And as you said, this is common in some Western countries like the UK and the US and Australia. Why do you think it's more important to have established here in Hong Kong now as well?
Well, for me, I was just so frustrated. When I first moved back and my grandmother fell, I called at least a dozen or so companies to try and find the appropriate care for her. But it was hard because I wasn't a healthcare professional. So I didn't know what my grandmother needed. And all of these companies that I was calling, they were all different types of agencies. How these companies work is that they take a commission, they find a nurse for you, and then that's it. And so the challenge for me was that I didn't know what type of care my grandmother needed. I didn't know who would be the most appropriate caregiver. And so it was extremely challenging. The question of why we decided to start this now, it was really just because I had to deal with it myself. And I knew that if I was struggling with this, chances are lots of other families were going through this too.
By having that experience, that gave you a real understanding of what's needed and what's missing. And then you've created something that gives the personal touch to it. So you're not just sending in a random nurse who you don't even know whether they speak Cantonese, English, Putonghua or Tagalog or whatever.
Yes.
And now you're actually really, it's almost like a dating agency for old people. But that's really cool.
Yeah.
Like you're really profiling and working out exactly what's needed and whether they need psychological help or physical help or medical help or companionship or all of that. So it's really amazing. I bet you're doing very well, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to take baby steps every day. But I think the main thing we're trying to do is to combine some technology or some online component with an offline skilled and trained home care team. And I think the combination, sometimes they're called O2O, online to offline or offline to online.
Oh, okay.
I think this model, you've seen it work in so many different industries. For example, Amazon or other types of online retailers, they typically have their website, but they also have a physical store. And so we're trying to do the same thing.
Oh, that's a great concept. That really makes sense. What do you think the key illnesses are that older people face? You mentioned Alzheimer's.
Yes, Alzheimer's is definitely probably the most common one. The other two being stroke and cancer, various forms of cancer. So we see for our customers, the majority of them suffer from one or more of those conditions. And I think on top of that, you have certain illnesses that you're not really able to define or quantify. For example, loneliness. I think a lot of them.
Or depression and anxiety and mental health issues as well, which can happen when you're older. Something that I keep wondering is, if somebody was ill but they were in their midlife, would you still care for them, or is there a age cutoff for your programs?
So we actually started off by focusing on, it was like a crisis model. So people who were suffering from, for example, they just had a stroke or they just fell. We initially catered towards that part of the population. But what we're really trying to do is to expand this so that instead of being reactive, people can be more preventative. And so starting at an earlier age, they might not need it with such a high frequency. But nonetheless, I think people can benefit from having a periodical checkup. So for example, one program that we're piloting right now is specifically targeting the baby boomers, the young old. So people like my parents, they're relatively healthy.
I think I'm a baby boomer.
But for most of them, they're extremely healthy and they might not appear to need home care. But at the same time, we've set up a program where it's infrequent. So from once a month to once a quarter, we'll have somebody go up to their home and they can choose whether or not they want somebody to work on the physical health. So it'll be some sort of physiotherapy, stretching, exercising. It could be the medication. So having a pharmacist come to see, oh, these are all the different types of supplements and medicines that I'm taking. Are there any potential side effects, interactions that I should be aware of? We also have a nurse assessment. So a nurse will go up to their home and conduct a comprehensive assessment, including what is their risk of fall, which happens a lot, or how's their nutrition. And so the baby boomers or the young old can choose based on their preferences, one of those options, and then we'll just monitor them. Hopefully it'll be a lot more preventative and we won't have to wait till a crisis happens.
That's really cool. So you're almost offering a couple of really completely different services there, but they really do sound like they'll be really helpful to whoever needs them, which is great. Do you have any experience with end-of-life care?
The only experience I personally had to deal with this from my grandmother, but this type of care we often call palliative care, which really is a new type of care that focuses on their quality of life. So instead of just providing the cure and thinking about ways to cure the patient, whether it's surgery or chemotherapy, they're often harmful to their bodies. Palliative care focuses on ways that we can boost their quality of life and make sure that they have a high quality of life, and especially in their last few months or weeks.
Is that where we hear the phrase dying with dignity?
Absolutely.
And people feel more dignified if they're in their own homes, surrounded by their own things and their family and friends, don't they?
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that we've learned, and we're now working with a university here in Hong Kong to come up with a palliative service offering. One of the things that we learned was the importance of communication, what they call advanced life planning, which involves the family members having a honest, sometimes difficult, but an honest conversation with their loved ones. Questions such as if, for example, they ended up not being able to move or being immobilized or being bedbound, would they still want to live in that way, or would they rather not proceed with a procedure which could potentially lead to that? Or understanding what really matters to them. Is it the quality of life, or do they really want to live so that they could see their kids or their grandkids' graduation? Just really understanding their priorities and having that conversation will allow the family members, which often comprises of various family members, so it allows them to make much easier decisions
when the time comes. And it's also having conversations about DNR. Do you want to resuscitate if you pass away and things like that? And many old people say they don't want to. A lot of people, I think, have had enough when they get towards the end and they don't want to be poked and prodded and resuscitated and just to live in pain longer. So they make a choice, don't they? And family need to get on board to understand what exactly the wishes are. Will you assist with that with your palliative care program?
Yes. And it's just to provide them with a framework of how to have that conversation. And I think especially in an Asian culture and in this part of the world, sometimes it's hard to really sit down and have that conversation. We're trying to come up with a way to help guide them through it so that they can really understand the merits and the benefits of doing this.
Is that because in Asian culture, some of the more difficult conversations are sort of swept under the carpet or not really talked about? Because that's sort of the way they're brought up. And it can be premarital sex, or it can be anything throughout your life, can't it? Or sexuality, or all those sorts of tough conversations. They're a little bit avoided sometimes, aren't they, in Chinese culture? Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, that's definitely right. And I think that also leads to, for example, dying at home, this concept, which is acceptable in lots of other places in the world. But here in Hong Kong, it's still extremely hard for a family member to die at home.
Do you know why that is?
There's a lot of risk involved. And right now it requires a lot of paperwork. A doctor has to come to the home to sign off. And there's a lot of risk for different parties involved. Right now, it's extremely difficult to do so. But if you actually talk to the elderly, you'd be surprised how many of them would rather just die in the comfort of their home.
How is that different to, say, in Australia or somewhere like that where we're dying at home? Is it more difficult here because of just laws and because it doesn't happen so much and so the whole society's not really as used to it?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly in Australia, but what I would suspect is that they will have some sort of guideline which will be much less rigorous than here in Hong Kong. And so it's just much more prevalent for that to occur with the consent of the family.
What information do you think that families need to help their loved one have a more holistic quality of life in the later stages of their life?
I think just first having that communication that we talked about, just to understand what really matters for mom and for dad. And it could be very different factors for them. And so I think first is having that communication. Second is to really understand what are the options out there. And really don't settle with only one option, which is just a public hospital or just an institution. With technology and with all these startups now, there are a lot of different options available. And this is a huge and growing industry. I think it's just about communication, exploring different options and seeing which ones works best for the family.
And then setting up a program with Evercare.
Absolutely. Yes.
See how I did that? Do you get a sense of what people care more about in their final years? What are the priorities for the aged population, do you think?
I can only speak from my experience, and I think it really boils down to family for a lot of the elderly here. And you'll see sometimes this shift away from the materiality and towards more just social connection and valuing that a lot more. And I think they value a lot the time they get to spend with friends as well, because they know that it's very rare for them to be able to play a game of mahjong. And so when it actually does happen, then it's just like a huge, huge event for them. But I think the most important thing from a son's perspective or a grandson's perspective is to provide them with those events and allow them to look forward to that. If you know, for example, that your dad really treasures a family trip with the entire family, then just talking to your siblings and just organizing it. And everyone has to make an effort, but just realizing that something that dad would really treasure, I think it's just something that it's on us.
That's such good advice. And I was going to ask you what the benefits of home care rather than hospital care is, but I think you've just answered it. All of those things that you said, that's the difference, isn't it? Is there anything else?
The difference between hospital care and home care, it's a lot less daunting for the elderly to be away from that environment. It's much more comfortable for the family members. I just spent probably a week every day during the week at a hospital for my grandmother. And I can tell you that it was extremely stressful. There's so many people, everyone's wearing the face mask. It's just not a comfortable environment for family members to be in.
It's very clinical.
Exactly. And as opposed to having that take place at home, everyone's just a lot more relaxed. And I think that benefits both the elderly and the family members.
That makes complete sense. If you were to fast forward 5 years from now, where would you see home care in Hong Kong heading? What would you like to see it look like in 5 years' time?
First, one of the topics that we talked about earlier is the shift from crisis to preventative. I think it would be really great if people were to accept taking home care services at an earlier stage where they might not see the need for it, but where it could really make a difference later on. Second, I think, is the role of technology in home care, which historically has not played a role at all. There's so many different ways technology can play a part, whether it is having this platform where you have all your information to, for example, things like telemedicine.
What's that?
Which means you can have a doctor consultation through your phone or through your iPad. In the comfort of your home, for both the doctor and for the patient, you can have a consultation. And so that would eliminate a lot of unnecessary travel time, wait time.
That's not something you do at the moment, but you'd like to try and implement?
Absolutely. That's
cool.
a natural next step. And even things like medication. So having a system whereby we could deliver medicine directly to people's homes instead of having them go to the doctor in order to get a prescription.
Which can be very difficult, can't it, for people who can't see, hear, or walk very well?
Exactly. And they have to wait so long. And it's often they're taking the same medicine every single day. So if we already know their condition, if we already have all the information on the platform, then we can provide more of these other add-on services. So I think where I hope home care in Hong Kong will be in 5 years is a lot more people earlier on using it, leveraging technology in many different ways. And for new initiatives, really, if we can really disrupt the existing industries, for example, telemedicine or medication delivery, for all of those to be available for people.
You know, there's going to be some young entrepreneur out there that's going to develop something you haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly.
And it's coming in a few years. And there could be other amazing inventions that could really add to home care.
Yes, that is the goal. And I think that would be great for the entire industry.
Wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
Can you think of an example of somebody who's moved from hospital care to home care, like a little anecdotal story of anybody that you've seen? Of course, don't name names, but is there anybody that you've really seen benefit from this change and it's sort of turned their health around a bit?
Yeah, I think the one example I can share, it really comes down to the hospital readmission rate. In other words, after they've been discharged, what is the likelihood of them being readmitted back to the hospital?
Is it a high rate?
Right now, it's extremely high. So if you look at the statistics, I think it's about 11% or so readmission rates. But for us, I think we get a lot of joy seeing potential issues whereby they would historically had to go back to the hospital, where we can just take care of that at home. This example of somebody being discharged from the hospital is an extremely critical case. It was after ICU. And the patient was completely bedbound and required our help for 24/7. And they experienced a lot of complications, especially early on. And some doctors were advising them to go back to the hospital, which of course for the family members, they didn't want that because it was just a really tough process. And they had already spent a month or two in the hospital. Luckily, we were able to come up with our specialists and our team. We worked with the doctors to come up with a solution. Our staff and our platform could support them at home. That was probably one of the moments that I felt extremely proud of our company, that we were able to provide that for the family. And I know that made a big difference for them as well.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah.
So you must have a team of all these professionals, but what if you decide, we need an osteopath or something, and we don't have an osteopath in our team? Do you just source people through connections in Hong Kong? Or if you need something like a Reiki master to come and do Reiki on someone, or do you just find people as you need them and build your team as you're going along?
Yeah, so the interesting thing with our company is we're a platform company, so not too dissimilar from the model for Uber, for example.
Oh.
So we have, on our supply side, we have these healthcare professionals, like you mentioned. On our demand side, we have our customers. So we're constantly trying to recruit both sides of our platform. Your question on finding more healthcare workers, so in other words, on our supplies, our strategy for that is actually really quite simple. We treat them very, very well, which means that we pay them the best in the market. We understand that it's an extremely tough job. The hours are long and we want to recognize them for that. So we pay them the best in industry. We provide them with training, specifically in the home care environment, which they don't have anywhere else. And we also provide them with support. For example, in a traditional agency, if you're a nurse and you're sent to my home to take care of my grandmother, you won't know a lot about my grandmother, you won't get a lot of information. But what we try to do is that we provide the support as well for our nurses. We tell them, hey, this is an Alzheimer's case. Be careful of these things because we've seen that this patient has a tendency to do this and that. We'll give our nurses kind of a summary of what to expect. And if they have any problems along the way, they always can call us for support. I think it's those factors. So paying them, providing them with training or ways to advance their careers, and also support that we try to record more.
Yeah, that's a great model, isn't it, for having happy staff working for you and feeling like they're valued as well, which is really nice. And if people want to get in touch with you to have a chat to you about aged care or to refer one of their loved ones, how can they do that?
They could visit our website. Our website is www.yourevercare.com, or they could also just send me an email. It's Ken, Ken, at yourevercare.com.
Okay, great. Ken, thank you so much for coming in to talk to me today. It's so fascinating, and I'm really, really thrilled to hear what you're doing in Hong Kong, because there is a huge aging population, and it's wonderful to know that there's such a great organisation to help people age with dignity and love and surrounded by friends and family.
Thank you so much for having me and for your interest in this topic.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think there'll be a lot of people out there very, very interested, and I hope that we can help people find the help that they've been perhaps wondering where it is and how they can get it. So that'll be amazing. If we can make a difference just to a couple of people by them hearing this, that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.